Today's argument is Enhancement Shaman. Why are we talking about Enhancement Shaman today? Well, because Enhancement Shaman has been overall perhaps one of the better specs this first season. If we're talking about Mythic Plus, Enhancement is firmly part of the meta in your top choices in Mythic Plus. Enhancement is definitely there. It wasn't at the start of the expansion because Restoration Shaman was clogging the space of the Shaman spot in Mythic Plus, but after a month or so, Enhancement took over as a choice in Mythic Plus, and in the raid, Enhancement has also been doing mightily well. Whether it was this 11.0.7 patch, or if we go all the way back down to 11.0, so the release of this expansion, Enhancement was at the top. So we have practically the strongest spec right now going into 11.1, and the reason why it's interesting to look at it at this moment is because they are going through quite a significant amount of changes in this patch. Quite large, in fact. Yes, to be fair, a few of these are a little bit misleading, since practically all of these changes are UI changes. Things like Maelstrom Weapon will now display a UI overlay at the top for when it reaches 10 stacks, or now Maelstrom Weapon will not be highlighting Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning or Elemental Blast at 10 stacks. Don't forget that Arc Discharge will highlight Maelstrom Weapon spenders when it's active, and that Ice Strike now highlights Frost Shock, as well as Ice Strike now having an impact sound updated, and a few other things you might have seen already, like the spell effects, the particle effects being changed of the abilities like Lightning Bolt, which is, to be fair, I'm not too much of a fan of this new change for Lightning Bolt, and a few other UI changes like these ones. Now, on for the actual changes. If you didn't know too much about Enhancement Shaman, about the top spec right now in the game when it comes to DPS, the shortest TLDR is that Stormbringer is now much weaker and possibly dead next patch, as well as the bigger TLDR being that now your Maelstrom Weapon big hitters are severely nerfed at the exchange of making your normal, run-of-the-mill, everyday generators being much stronger. So when we talk about generators, we are talking about things like Storm Strike or things like Lava Lash having a higher average damage compared to Chain Lightning or Tempest or Lightning Bolt that you use to spend Maelstrom Weapon with. Now, this is obviously much different than what is going out right now. This is your average, I mean, not really average because it's a plus 20. I guess it's a very high average Enhancement Shaman, and his damage at the moment is approximately in the 70-ish% range, all nature, all lightning damage, and all coming from spenders. It's coming from Lightning Bolt, and then when Lightning Bolt turns into Tempest, as well as Chain Lightning, and then what these things do to target, which is Lightning Rod. That's it. That's all the damage. If you look at the actual spenders, you have Storm Strike all the way down over here. Despite having 382 casts, it's doing a whooping 212,000 damage per cast, compared to the small and minor 8 million damage per cast of Tempest, or even 4.5 million damage per cast of Chain Lightning. Further down, you have Lava Lash with 87 casts, doing 0.55% of your damage, despite the 87 casts. That's how weak it is. In single target, it gets slightly better, of course. Well, for two reasons. One is because Totemic is now the to-go build when it comes to single target. In Mythic Plus, Stormbringer has still kept up the popularity, but in the raid now Totemic has taken over. And when it comes to Totemic, of course, number one, you don't have Tempest, you don't have all of that nature damage from Stormbringer, and of course you don't have multi-targets that you can get damage from Lightning Rod, from Crash Lightning, from Chain Lightning, so you have to use way more single target abilities, including Storm Strike, which gains way more value in single target than it does in AoE. But you can see that even in Totemic you still have quite the low value of your spenders. In some cases, spenders are so weak, again, like Lava Lash, you don't even bother clicking it when you're playing Totemic. At least when it comes to Stormbringer, you do click it. It just does no damage, but you still click it, especially to spread flame shocks around. So Blizzard had this idea. They were like, you know, Enhancement Shaman right now just have too much damage coming from Maelstrom weapons. Instead, we just want to redistribute the damage back to some of their melee abilities, because they're not hitting as hard as we would like them to be. After all, if I showed you this, you know, this is a ranged spec, you know, ranged ability, ranged ability, Flame Shock is also a ranged ability actually. Feral Spirits proc by themselves and attack the mobs, you can use them from range as well, so pretty much your only melee abilities you're doing damage with are Storm Strike, as well as your procs of your Flame Tongue weapon and Wind Fury weapon, as well as Lava Lash. You basically have like 7 or 8% of your damage actually coming from melee abilities as a melee spec. So Blizzard was kind of out with it. So they thought, you know what, we are going to literally double the damage of Storm Strike, we're going to double the damage of Ice Strike, double the damage of Lava Lash, we're going to triple the initial damage, the initial hit of Crashed Lightning. So all of your default melee abilities that do not spend Maelstrom are practically doubled in damage. Now, this comes at a pretty hefty cost when it comes to your spenders, because in particular, Elemental Spirits gets nerfed quite a bit. The nerf of Elemental Spirits is that now, while gaining sure the 10% physical damage when you still use Elemental Spirits, because otherwise normally it would only be 15% physical damage just with the Feral Spirits. If you take Elemental Spirits, you used to lose the 15% physical damage. Now you still gain physical damage at a 10% rate, but now your elemental damage, your 3 elements, Fire, Frost or Lightning, are now reduced to 10% every Ghost Wolf you have out, instead of 20%. This is massive, especially when you play Stormbringer, right? Because you were playing Stormbringer for nature damage, as we saw, like 80+% something of your damage was nature. You had talents in Stormbringer like Rolling Thunder, which gave you a free Feral Spirit for 15 seconds every time you procced your Tempest, which could be quite often and could spawn quite a lot of nature spooky ghosts. Also your old tier, your current tier I guess, in this current season, activating Feral Spirits summoned an extra Feral Spirit, and you could get your Feral Spirits to have a very low cooldown compared to their 90-second actual cooldown. So the whole power of this spender strategy was the fact that you were just stockpiling so many Elemental Spirits, especially nature Elemental Spirits, which was skyrocketing your nature damage, meaning mostly your Tempest and your Lightning Bolt and basically all of your Maelstrom weapon spenders. So that's the major nerf you're receiving with this change. You are getting double damage basically on all of your generators, but at the cost of now having a much reduced stacking damage of nature damage you have from Elemental Spirits. To the point that now, in this 11.1 patch, you're likely not even going to bother going for Elemental Spirits, which is something that Totemic Enhancement Shamans are already doing right now. They don't even bother going for this, which is also likely partially why Totemic is getting stronger in the next patch, since they're not going to be suffering nearly as much from the nerf of Elemental Spirits like the Stormbringer version was, because the Stormbringer version most definitely was playing around with Elemental Spirits. Now, what you noticed first is that there seems to be at least a lot of talent switcheroos, right? If we go from current live version to 11.1 and you look at the changes, a lot of talents are moving around, right? Well, actually, there is no change, in the sense that what you see here being chosen as talents is the exact same talents being chosen here. The only difference is that they have been moved around. But you can still play nearly the exact same build you were playing right now in live, minus a couple of talents which, well, have been removed completely from the talent tree. This new position of talents is actually quite good, because the older version locked you behind. For example, if you wanted to take Offhand and Ashen Catalyst and Lashing Flames, so the entire line of talents to buff either your Flame Shock, but more importantly your Lava Lash, all of this was cock-blocked by this useless talent, which was mostly an AoE talent, which made no sense, right? You want to play a more fire-based spec around Lava Lash, you want to take these talents, but first you have to spend the tax of this AoE talent that doesn't really make much sense. So the new version of this build in 11.1 in this new version allows you to now go down the fire route of your build freely, because now the choice nodes of the automatic proc of Ice Strike or the cast version of Ice Strike, and as well as the follow-up Maelstrom and Fire Nova, are now right here. So they're easier to pick as a single talent without cock blocking you from any follow-ups. They have multiple avenues you can reach them from, and now this route is much easier to take. That's the major change with these talents. Now this route is likely going to become very relevant because it's been giga buffed. As we mentioned, things like Offhand, number one, it's been buffed. Now it can reduce the cooldown of your Lava Lash by upwards of 75%. So basically your Cooldown, which was 18 seconds, reduced by 6 seconds to 12, and then because as a shaman, as an enhancement shaman, you stack haste, at least a good amount of haste. This is a 670 item level shaman with almost 18,000 haste, brings the cooldown down to 9.5 seconds, and then this one procs, and it reduces the cooldown by 75%, which doesn't take into account your hasted number, so it's practically almost nearly resets completely the cooldown. You have Ashen Catalyst, which, like before, can make your lava lash damage tick upwards of more and more damage the more flame shock ticks you go for. And don't forget the base value of lava lash. Lava lash's damage is doubled in this patch, so now you have a doubled damage of lava lash plus multiple, easier to path through, no longer blocked by this choice node. That further increases the damage of lava lash. And then lastly, a buffed lash in flames, because now it works from sundering as well. The increased damage of flame shock no longer works just with lava lash but also with sundering. So for example, in AoE now it's basically very easy to hit all of your enemies with flame shock on with sundering and make them take double the damage from their flame shock. This already is very good for Totemic. Now, to be fair, yes, Totemic stocks are much higher this patch compared to Stormbringer. It's likely going to be the meta choice for Enhancement Shaman, but it's also been significantly nerfed. Remember that this one, that procced your Tremor Totem at 200% effectiveness when you casted Sundering. Now it's at 100% effectiveness, so it's been cut in half in terms of damage. And also, this talent has been nerfed so much, you now pretty much just go for the opposite, because this one used to increase the damage of Surging Totem by 150% during Ascendance. Now it's been cut all the way down to 50%. So it's a significant nerf to the, I guess, the initial burst damage inside of Ascendance, especially of Totemic. The compensation buff is down this side. The Searing Totem spawned from Lively Totems, as well as the explosion, the Fire Nova explosion, have both been buffed significantly, which will also gain even more value because, as we mentioned before, this was very weak, not just because the numbers were very weak, but also because you weren't even bothering to play Lava Lash, and Lava Lash was what was necessary to proc Lively Totems. So now, presumably, with a much stronger Lava Lash, it's much easier for you to actually benefit from these buffs. The buffs from Totemic to buffing both of the Bolt and the Volley by 40%. One of the other major changes to Totemic, which wasn't yet quite taken in Mythic Plus right now, Stormbringer is still the choice, is the major buff given after Splintered Elements, which is Primordial Storm. Because currently, what you have now in live, after Primordial Wave, you still have your Splintered Elements, but then you have this. Primordial Wave generating 3 stacks of Maelstrom Weapon, which is, fine. You were just overflowing with so much Maelstrom anyways. This wasn't really that big of a deal. Now, though, it's changing to something much better. Basically, clicking on your Primordial Wave still makes Primordial Wave function like it normally does. Its normal effect is still the same. However, now it also turns Primordial Wave into Primordial Storm, which is going to make you hit 3 different times for the same amount of damage: Flame Strike, Frost Strike, and Storm Strike damage, and at the end it's gonna unleash a Lightning Bolt or a Chain Lightning at 150% effectiveness. Now, the second part is not what's strong here, it's the first part. It's the fact that these hits you are going for, which are gonna now move to an AoE target dummy, because this shows it better, is that these hits count as 3 individual hits. So when you land Primordial Wave, it turns into Primordial Storm, and when you use it, this swing right here hits 3 times each target. Now this becomes very relevant, number one, because this hit is not capped. It says that it does reduced damage beyond 5 targets, sure, but it can hit more than 5. So you're melee auto-attacking 3 times, something like, say, 10 enemies. This is gonna be 30 attacks, 30 melee attacks at once. This becomes incredibly powerful when you tie this together with Doom Winds, because Doom Winds increases your chance to activate the Wind Fury weapon by 200%, as well as giving it 10% more damage. On top of this, you already have Unruly Winds to give you a 3rd attack from your Wind Fury procs. You also have Forceful Winds to give you stacking increased damage of Wind Fury weapon anyways. So this becomes increasingly more and more powerful when you tie this together, practically, with your Doom Winds. So you proc your Doom Winds, or you activate your Doom Winds, then you use Primordial Wave, it turns into Primordial Storm, and you do this, triggering about 64 million auto attacks, which is very, very strong. When you see the results of this little thing, you will see that Wind Fury Attack and Primordial Wave have done a ton of damage, as well as Doom Winds, of course, because of the amount of attacks you have. It's very good in AoE, it gives you definitely an extra help as well in AoE for burst damage. You might have lost some here and there, but this is now a very powerful tool as well. Now, we have been discounting Stormbringer a bit too much. To be fair, Stormbringer does get some nice quality of life. Technically, the quality of life right now is bugged and is not working, but the idea of the quality of life is that now your lovely lightning conduit is supposed to be stacking around to multiple targets, because the positive change for Stormbringer is that now Chain Lightning with conductive energy will apply lightning rods to secondary targets that are not already affected by lightning rod. This was a very annoying, feature of playing Stormbringer. The fact that when you wanted to maximize your damage, and this was actually very effective for maximizing your damage, you needed to basically Chain Lightning the first target, but then tab target to another one to spread your lightning conduit, and continue to tab target to spread lightning conduit to as many targets as possible, because as many targets with lightning rod on top of them were going to take 10% of all the damage you were doing with your spenders. So the more of these lightning rods you were able to spread, the better. But it was somewhat annoying, because the best way was to basically just tab target and make sure you were trying to Chain Lightning each and every one of them to spread the rod. Now, with this QoL change, it will happen automatically even if you stick to one target. You stick to one target, you land Chain Lightning, that target already has Lightning Rod on it, so Chain Lightning will apply Lightning Rod to the second target it's hitting. Rinse and repeat. So it's very good for spreading Lightning Rods more easily without having to just spaz around with your tab targeting. Now, the other good buff, which again is also bugged, is that Conductive Energy will also now cause Primordial Wave to apply Lightning Rod to its targets. Now, Primordial Wave no longer needs the activation, in case you aren't aware, in this 11.1. Primordial Wave is just an instant hit on a bunch of enemies affected by your Flame Shock. You don't need to do anything else, you just need to click it once. Even if you click it once and we spread our Flame Shock, and then with Primordial Wave, technically this one should now attach all of them with our Lightning Rod. It doesn't. It doesn't work right now, but the QoL is there. Once it will work, this is also a good QoL for Stormbringer. The problem, of course, is the damage loss of Stormbringer by nerfing your stacking damage of particularly nature damage from Elemental Spirits, which is now much weaker, weakening the spec, as well as the buffing of your generators, especially Lava Lash, now doing significantly more damage than before. The other thing is that, of course, without nearly as many Feral Spirits popping out, as well as not nearly as much nature damage being generated because you don't play with Stormbringer anymore, you're also gaining more value with your Lava Burst now compared to before. If you compare just the base flat damage of a max, a max Maelstrom weapon Lightning Bolt, it crits for about 1.1 million. Again, 1.1 million crit. You now do the same with Lava Burst, and it's a comfortable 1.5 million hit. So now, without your little Ghost Wolves buffing up your nature damage to the extent they are doing right now in live, it also makes Lava Burst more valuable than your normal Lightning Bolt. And also, the base damage of Lava Lash is now getting much higher. As Storm Strike as well is pretty good, but Lava Lash, you can see critting for 2.8 million. 2.8 million crits of Lava Lash are unthinkable right now in this patch. Even 1.2 million like default hit of Lava Lash, it's much harder than it currently does. Storm Strike is still hitting quite a bit, but not nearly as much to 2.8 million crits. So you do have now more value, especially in single target, to constantly play around your Lava Lash, simply because of the damage increase you can gain from this ability now that its damage has been doubled, and you can now synergize down this route much more easily without having to spend a useless talent over here. So these talents are now much stronger for the damage increase of your Lava Lash, which is what will be likely your default option coming into 11.1, seeing of course any possible future changes to the build. Now the one annoying thing though could be possibly your tier set, because your tier set has the same winning streak mechanic about stacking up the damage of your Storm Strike, Crash Lightning and Lava Lash. So again, we're talking about generators doing more damage instead of spenders. And then your 4-piece set bonus can benefit from all of these stacks you gained of the damage increase by reducing the cooldown of Doom Winds. This can be somewhat annoying because your Doom Winds has a 1-minute cooldown. It can line up perfectly if you take it with the 3 minutes of Ascendance every minute, or much more simply with the 30-second cooldown of Primordial Wave. Every other Primordial Wave you will be able to use Doom Winds. However, because of this, added cooldown reduction, if we were to use them at the same time, so Doom Winds followed up by Primordial Wave, now Primordial Wave should be back off cooldown when there is about 30 seconds left to Doom Winds. However, because of the cooldown reduction you can get from Doom Winds, this can become a bit, a bit more RNG. So right now, for example, you can see that Doom Winds is about 28, 27, 25, 24, 22, 21. It's sort of just spazzing out, and then when Primordial Wave comes back, it's 16 seconds left. Which means that if you use Primordial Wave, then Primordial Wave will still be on cooldown when your Doom Winds comes back. So you will be in this somewhat awkward situation when you want to time them up together, especially always in AoE, because we mentioned the synergy of the multi-attacking damage of Primordial Storm with Doom Winds. You want to tie them up together, but the CDR given to Doom Winds can make it a bit more awkward in Mythic Plus. Yes, you might luck out and actually get a near 30-second cooldown Doom Winds from your tier set, making it line up perfectly with Primordial Wave, but it will only happen once in a while. Many other times you will be left with a 44-second cooldown Doom Winds. And then you will be in that awkward situation of, do I just use Primordial Wave and then desync it from Doom Winds, or delay my Primordial Wave by 15 seconds to make it come back on cooldown with Doom Winds? That's perhaps the only slightly annoying or frustrating feature to deal with when it comes to this tier set. But for the most part, I would say it is for now a positive set of changes for enhancement. Yes, we're not talking about the disappearance of Ancestral Guardians, that's kind of hurtful. But in terms of playstyle, being more focused on your actual melee hits rather than being able to just do DPS by doing this as basically a pseudo range spec with your Chain Lightning and Lightning Bolt and Tempest feels better. Just as a spec in general feels better, also being more tied to buffs you have on yourself and damage you have on yourself rather than an endless stream of wolves around you skyrocketing your damage with multiplicative buffs. Also feels better. There's still some RNG involved. Your Sundering can reset 1 time or 3 times or 4 times or 5 times still, but overall I think it's an improvement on the current version of Enhancement Shaman by now moving more towards focusing on your generators, your melee hits, more so than your spenders. So for today we can be done with our review of the currently strongest spec in Season 1 to see what are their planned changes for Season 2. For now, philosophically, the changes are positive. We will have to see, of course, how any of this will translate into actual numbers and into actual performance coming in the next season. So for today on this Wednesday, we can now leave each other. We're starting as usual the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yep, once again, we have gotten on for far too long. God damn it.